When I decided to make this video series about heaven, actually it's about the afterlife, and I was thinking about heaven, and the first three segments have been about heaven. I wasn't really thinking about hell, and I find as I come to the end of this that that's exactly the one subject that I really haven't covered. It's obviously something that people would have questions about because, well, in our popular parlance, when we talk about heaven, the flip side is hell. If there is a heaven and if God is all good, then, it seems kind of, to most people, strange that there would be this bad place where bad people would go too. Why would God do that if he's all good? Why would there be bad people to begin with? Why did he make people so that they turn bad and they have to go to hell? And if in the end of time everything comes right and there's justice and goodness and mercy and light, well, if you have hell there at the end of it all too, then doesn't that mean that something has gone gravely wrong? Is the universe a Manichaean kind of universe with good and bad constantly straining against each other, and God is on the good side, but he's kind of equally matched by the devil in this tug of war? So those are a lot of questions that I feel that there are probably so many of them, and they're so natural that I'm going to have to make two parts to address the subject of exactly why there is a hell. How does hell fit in, as I call it? I think that really the only place that I personally want to start with this is from the gut, if you will. This is the day when I found out about several Mormons. There were women and children as well as men who had been in cold blood gunned down by bandilleros in Chihuahua, Mexican drug cartel members. Apparently it was a mistake. They thought maybe they belonged to the other rival cartel and they might be running some drugs over this group's territory, but what the hey, so what if there were some kids in there? They kill kids all the time. If they belong to the other cartel, then hey, that's that many more of them that aren't going to grow up to be competition. And this is a lot like ISIS, as several people have already said. We have people in this world who cut off defenseless people's heads for no better reason than just to terrify. We've had people in Mexico, and I've lived for Texas for a good bit of my life, and I listened to the Spanish language stations, and I heard a lot about this. It's routine for kidnappers to send a finger or an ear of, say, a 7-year-old child who has been kidnapped. And maybe if the parent doesn't pay up right away, then tomorrow you get another finger or the other ear. Now, look, don't give me this stuff about how if God really exists, then everybody should get into heaven, because people, they just make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but we're not really all that bad. None of us. We have goodness in our hearts. Yeah, how do you cut a screaming child's finger off and send it to the parents if you're basically a good soul? And there's so many things. Maybe I'm just having too much in my life right now. I happen to be reading the Gulag Archipelago for the first time, and Stalin had somewhere between 40 and 60 million people executed. Maybe the upper end of that is a little high. I may be off a few tens of millions, but we have just gotten out of such a horrible century in the 20th century, and we're still in it. In fact, in some ways it seems to be worse. Those people are not in heaven. Now, let me kind of back off from the personal here and try to be a little more rational about it. I'm not their judge, neither are you. I can't judge anybody. I can look at these deeds and say these are straight out of hell. These are hellacious deeds. I can't judge the people who do them. For instance, and I thought about this, and it was quite a little mental exercise for me, but I hypothesized, okay, imagine that you're a 16-year-old kid in a gang, and you're trying to impress the other members. You may even be kind of under, you're on probation. You're trying to show that you're one of the psychopaths. And so they're cutting members off a 9-year-old child, maybe raping her and then cutting her to pieces. And so you do your bit. You're probably high on something anyway. Are you going to hell? It seems like you'd be a pretty good candidate, doesn't it? But maybe, maybe you shortly thereafter end your life on overdoses, and maybe God sees that in you, that you were so sickened and disgusted with what you allowed circumstances to make you, that even though you did the deeds of a person who belongs in hell, there's something that only God can see in you that redeems you. I'm not going to say, no, that can't happen. I'm not God. But I'm convinced that there are people who are truly evil. Dante, toward the end of the Inferno, he discovers that, I think it was a pope, that he discovers that. He says, wait a minute, you're still alive. I just left the earth up there, and your soul is down here in the pit of hell being punished forever. How does that happen? And the sinner explains to Dante, well, the soul can actually pass out of the body and go to hell while the body is still alive. Now, we're talking about the early 14th century here. That's kind of medieval, but I've always kind of liked that. I think that kind of, the possibility of that is very interesting to me, that there are some people who are so wicked that their soul is dead even though their body is still alive. I think that really happens with some people. And when I say wicked, I've used the word evil and wicked, and of course they're going to keep coming up in a discussion like this, and I want to take a little time. In fact, this may consume most of the time that's left for part one here, but I want to be very careful about explaining what I mean by evil, because we're usually not. In a previous video, I was having the same discussion about good. We toss around words like good and evil all the time, very, very carelessly, and they need close definition. You could even do something, you could be bad. First of all, we're all wrong a lot of the time, and we're all weak, and we all commit errors every day. We do things that we shouldn't do. We're foolish, we're thoughtless. Sometimes knowing full well that we shouldn't do something, we do it anyway. That's not good, but that doesn't mean that we're evil. The word bad, as I was about to say, we probably shouldn't use that in moral discussions at all because it's so vague. But it seems to me you could be kind of a bad guy, say if you were dating a lot of girls and not really telling any of them what you were, that you weren't that interested in them, that you just kind of liked girls, and so a lot of them thought that they were special to you and you just led them on. Of course, girls have been known to lead guys on too, but behavior like this, you could be a bad guy in that respect, but not be evil. So evil is knowing that something is wrong, knowing full well, and deliberately serving the cause of wrong because you enjoy it, you adore it, you worship it. Satan, in John Milton's Paradise Lost, at one point says, "Evil, be thou my good." And, Paradise Lost is really a terrific insight into the pathology of wickedness. Satan, and Milton caught a lot of flack for this, but Satan is actually sketched to look like us, like a human being. He's not a he's not some guy with fangs and fiery drool and horns. He's a a very relatable human being, and Milton shows us through him what damnable thought processes are like. Satan is always trying to figure out what God is up to so that he can do just the opposite. That's so perfect for a definition of evil. Evil is worship of disorder. It's trying to figure out where the order is, what's constructive, what's productive, what's good, what's helping people. Once I figure that out, then I know what I'm going to do, because it's going to be just the opposite. It's a really destructive kind of counterconformism. Satan in Milton doesn't have an original bone in his body. He's not creative. In a sense, he doesn't really exist. And we're going to get back to that in part 2. You say, well, how does evil exist if God is all good? And in the real sense, he doesn't. But he's the reality of illusion. He's the father of illusion. Just as a tree in the sunlight casts a shadow. The shadow is really there as not light, but it's not a material reality. Now, can people be evil in the sense that they know what they're doing and they deliberately do it because they know that it's wrong and because they enjoy it? Yeah. I'm not going to mention names because it's not my place in this universe to pass judgment on people, but I know that there are people like that, and I know that heaven is not the place where they end up. As I say, I don't want to go a whole lot farther in this first part, but maybe we should just kind of wrap it up and leave it there. Somebody committed evil in murdering those little children. Whenever children are abused in a way like that, you're in the presence of evil. Somebody deliberated what was going to happen and executed it, and it had the desired effect of terrorizing other people, and especially if we, as we often do in stories about ISIS and other terrorists, if we hear that the people involved seem to have enjoyed what they were doing, we know that we're in the presence of evil. So this is part of the afterlife story in a way, and I'll wrap this up and explain it more clearly in part 2. But in a way, it's not. That's the whole point. It's not an afterlife. There's no life for those whose soul has been lost to evil. It's the end of life. It's arrival in a state of nothingness. There's no knowledge of God. There's no growth. There's no time. When we were talking about the universe coming to absolute stillness and absolute zero in the context of physics, well, spiritually, evil is that dead-end, wound down, frozen universe. Nothing. That's where evil souls end up. Nowhere.